Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Drones and Tourism. My name is Jennifer Brown, and I'm with Hospitality Newfoundland and Labrador here in St. John's, Newfoundland. So before we begin, I'd like to address some housekeeping notes. You'll notice a chat window on the screen, so feel free to type in any questions you may have throughout the presentation, and when Chris is done, we'll do a Q&A. Also, if you are on the phone, we please ask that you press *6 to mute your phone line, and if you want to ask a question verbally, it's #6 to unmute. So we're very pleased that you could join us today, and I'd like to acknowledge participation from my partner in New Brunswick, Jason Ferris of the Tourism Industry Association of New Brunswick, also known as TIMB, and our partner Tourism Atlantic, ACOA. So if you're following along online today, please feel free to tweet or post using the hashtag TourismTech. And we're really, really happy to have Chris LeGrow of CloudBreaker here this afternoon. So Chris, president of CloudBreaker, is an airline pilot with 15 years of experience in a variety of aviation fields, including offshore surveillance, pilot training, and commercial airline operations. He is a skilled pilot for a fixed-wing aircraft, knowledgeable in UAV systems and their components, as well as their regulatory frameworks. Chris has developed flight procedures and protocols to ensure CloudBreaker UAV operators are certified, safe, and reliable. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Chris to get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for showing up for today's presentation. It's an honor to be here, and I hope you get something out of today's talk about drones and specifically the impact they're having in the marketing world in tourism. Feel free to ask any questions along the way or at the end. I'll be happy to answer them for you, and if I can't answer for you today, fire me an email and I'll certainly get back to you. So I guess we'll get started. We're really going to talk about three main points today, or main areas around drones and tourism. The first one being is the regulatory roadmap, where we are currently in this country with the rules around drones. You probably have heard in the news in the last couple of years a lot of stories about drone regulation or UAV regulation, incidents that folks are having both on the ground and in the air with UAVs. And the upcoming changes to those regulations that are going to be made by Transport Canada, most likely this summer, but they haven't set a date for that yet. I'll touch a little bit on drone operations. A lot of tourism operators have their own drones, small consumer-grade drones that they use to either do small media with, or they use to record some of their interactions that they have with their clients or whatever. If you don't own your drone and you're looking at and you have a company that would benefit from some aerial photography or videography or that drone aerial look that you get from drones, I'll give you a few tips on how to go about researching and hiring a professional drone company to gather that information for you. Just a little bit about CloudBreaker. We started CloudBreaker back in 2014. We came together with our creative director, John Sturridge. I'm a professional pilot by trade. John's a professional photographer. We were able to combine those two skill sets to start this little company. About 2 years ago, we invited Nick White to join us, and when we started our mapping and surveying service, and Nick is an integral part of that. The one thing with drones is that they're great at collecting data, but you need really good people on the other end to process that data, whether it be media or mapping data, whatever. It's really important that you have folks that are able to turn it into something productive. We're Transport Canada certified, which means we have a special flight operations certificate from Transport Canada to operate UAVs anywhere in Atlantic Canada and Ontario. I'll explain a little bit about what an SFOC is later on. And of course, everything that we do starts with safety, and we try and do it as efficiently as possible and use reliable machines in the process. Most of our business has been using UAVs for digital marketing. We've been hired by small companies that do not have a marketing arm to them to produce not only to capture the aerial video and ground video, but also to turn it into a product, right down to being hired by film companies who just want the raw data, and then working with the director on the set there to capture the image that they're looking for. So, but in terms of tourism businesses, especially ones that we find in Atlantic Canada, where we have an abundance of beautiful scenery and very unique experiences, getting aerial video to include in your marketing can certainly elevate that product that you're delivering. There's a growing demand for online content, and especially video content. Drones provide a unique perspective that you may not otherwise get, and up until a few years ago you couldn't afford, or it would be very difficult to afford by using a helicopter. And with the rapid developments in drone technology, things have really accelerated in the last 3 or 4 years. They're becoming more user-friendly and more accessible to people in the general public, which is both a good thing and also a challenge for us as professional pilots and the regulator, in Transport Canada. So with all that being said, we have to navigate or find a way to use these incredible pieces of technology in a safe and effective and efficient manner. And that's what we'll talk a little bit about today. Part of the presentation, I included some videos. We tried them out earlier on the webinar here to see how well they'll flow. So my apologies if it's a bit, they're flowing really nice on my computer, but with the internet connection it might be a little choppy. But I just wanted to give an example of a Newfoundland and Labrador tourism ad that has used UAV or aerial video as a complement to a piece they did about nameplate or place names. So without further ado, I'll send that off. And there is no sound, but you can see that they've used both ground shots and aerial shots to complement this video. And we found in the last couple of years as well that after about 30 seconds of filming or 30 seconds of aerial imagery, people start to tune out. So you really need to mix your content up. Otherwise, you're just looking at a continuous drone video and not giving the subject matter much context. And of course, Newfoundland and Labrador Tourism is well known for their ads and have won many awards for them. And this is just another example of one that they produced last year, I think it was. So I want to get the rules of the road out of the way early. It's if you want a good way to fall asleep at night, sit down and read the current drone regulations. It's pretty dry stuff. When I was becoming a professional pilot, it was unnecessary evil that you had to sit through, airlaw class. There are a lot of rules around drones, and both from a recreational standpoint and from a commercial standpoint, and they're really, for a lot of folks, they're really hard to navigate, especially if you don't have a background in aviation. And that is, they're working on clearing that up a little bit to make things a little bit more straightforward. But an analogy I commonly use with folks that are using drones for the first time, whether it be for fun or for your business, is the analogy of the airport fence. When I was growing up as a young fella, around St. John's here, I've always wanted to be a pilot. And my dad would take me out to the airport, and I would look at the planes taking off and landing. And they had a flight school out there at the time. And I would sit on the safe side of the airport fence looking over that fence, wanting to be a part of that whole thing. So for me to get to the other side of that fence and get in that aircraft, I had to go to ground school, get some training, get some flight training, get my licenses, so on and so forth. Now with drones and the movement of that technology, the advancement of that technology, folks are not requiring to have to go through that fence anymore. There isn't that barrier. You can now be a part of the National Airspace System with a drone in your backyard, especially if you're in the area of St. John's. And that's where folks like myself go to work every day. It takes us thousands of hours to get the experience to work in that sector. And now we're being faced with folks that are buying them at Best Buy or Henry's and are now potentially interfering with what we have to do. So that's why there are a lot of rules, and it's important that we know what they are before we go out and purchase one. And if we do purchase one, we know where we can and cannot operate. This is a screenshot of a skier in Austria that was in a race, and they just introduced drone technology to film that race. They were chasing the skier down the hill. Unfortunately, the drone hit a guide wire and almost landed on the skier, and it would have probably, if not killed him, it would have hurt him very poorly. So it goes to show that there's consequences about operating these things. We have to operate them safely and take all risks into account. This is a screen grab from a video showing a small drone. It's a Phantom that had lost battery power and had ended up landing on a spectator's head in Quebec, in Canada. And this happened about 2 years ago. And that person was knocked unconscious. And the operator who was there was doing it recreationally, had just bought the unit and was filming a relative in that event, and didn't know why the drone came down on the crowd. So again, I'm not trying to scare people into purchasing these things. It's just that there is a consequence to using these things. They look like toys, a lot of them do, but there's a consequence if we don't use them wisely. This is the final preachy moment, I promise. This is a imagery of a drone, and you can see right here, I'll put on my laser pointer. This is the model of the drone right here going into an aircraft engine. This is a model that one of the aircraft engine manufacturers created there a couple of years ago, and I was able to get a copy of. And it simulates the drone entering the what we call the N1 fan blades of the jet engine. And of course, they're turning at a very high speed, somewhere between 25 and 30,000 RPM, depending on the engine. And it doesn't take very long to turn that into shrapnel. And that's a small drone made out of plastic. It's not a big drone or anything like that. So as a professional pilot, these are things that we're very concerned about, and it's in the top 5 of our safety concerns now across that we have to deal with every day. So in Canada, Transport Canada is responsible for the Canadian aviation regulations, and that's the body or the legislation, the acts that guide everything from how you can maintain your airplane to how airlines are supposed to operate, and now UAVs. And the regulations have had some difficulty keeping up with the technology. Technology has advanced rapidly in the last 5 or 6 years. And the government has had a challenge trying to keep up with that. Mostly it's been due to the fact that these things have become a lot easier to fly. Years ago, if you wanted to fly a model aircraft, you had to go buy it, you had to build it, and then you had to get someone to teach you how to fly it, usually a RC club or something like that. Now these things are so stable and easy to fly that you can let go of the controls and we'll just hover there for a lot of these multi-rotor drones, like the Phantom and the Inspire. So they're a lot more accessible now to the general public, and that's why we're seeing a lot more of them. The statistic that we used last year was there was 1 million drones underneath the Christmas trees of people in the United States last year. So they're taking it very seriously down there as well. Transport Canada is modifying how they're going to regulate drones. Right now, it's based. The rules are based around what's your intention with them. Are you going to use them for fun, or are you going to use them for a commercial purpose? And I'll talk about what a commercial purpose is later on. So that will then dictate where you can fly and how high you can fly. They're now moving to away from that and to something called a risk-based regulation, which means it's going to be less about why you're using the drone and more about how heavy it is and where you're going to operate it. And therefore, as you get more closer to urban areas, the rules become a lot more restrictive. There's also other laws that folks got to remember as well outside of the Canadian aviation regulations, and those are things like, for example, Parks Canada do not allow drones to operate in provincial parks unless you have permission from the superintendent of that park. We work at a Cape Spear a lot. We're planning to do some work out in Gros Morne. We have to get permission from those folks before we operate the drone there to ensure that we're not interfering with what's going on in the park. Obviously, Trespassing Act, you just can't jump on someone's land and start flying the drone around. Or if you lose your drone and find it on someone's private property, you've got to respect that property and get permission to enter it before going there. Some of the terminology that's used in the documentation that you can find on the Transport Canada website. What is a built-up area? Well, according to Transport Canada, a built-up area is anything bigger than a farmstead. So if you're closer to the ghouls, if you're from Newfoundland, you'll know where the ghouls are. If you're inside of that, then chances are that's considered a built-up area. And if you're using a drone of a certain size, they don't want you operating in a built-up area unless you have proper certification. That certification I was talking about is something called an SFOC, which is an acronym for Special Flight Operations Certificate, and that is what allows a lot of commercial operators in the country right now to operate. I'll talk a little bit about it later. UAV or UAS is the short for the unmanned aerial vehicle, and that's how we in the industry like to refer them as. But of course, the popular slang for them is drones. VLOS is visual line of sight, and that's a term that's important to know. All these rules that are set up by Transport Canada, both now and into the future, will be based on you keeping that machine in sight at all times. And as these drones get smaller, they're a lot harder to see. So there's a downside with using a smaller drone for that situation. Even though the documentation says it can go 4 kilometers in one direction, doesn't mean you're allowed to fly it 4 kilometers in one direction. You got to keep it in sight at all times. One issue that folks run into who are not familiar with aviation is something called class of airspace. Everything above our head is owned by by NAV Canada, or is controlled by NAV Canada. And depending on the type of traffic requirements in the area, they classify airspace from A to G. And A being very restrictive, G being what we call uncontrolled. So it could be in the center of the province. There's all kinds of uncontrolled airspace in there because there's not a lot of air traffic out there. And commercial application. A lot of folks say, well, I'm just going up taking a picture of my buddy kayaking, and that's it. I'm not going to use it for commercial application or anything. He might put it on his website later on, but I'm not getting any money for it. It doesn't matter, according to Transport Canada anyway. If there's going to be any kind of commercial benefit to what you're doing, that's considered a commercial application. Even if you say take a picture of your house, and 3 years down the road you give it to a realtor to use it as a part of your advertising, they consider that a commercial application. Now, does Transport Canada go through every web page looking for this kind of stuff? No, but you got to understand that if you have a commercial intention with it, then based on the current regulations, you require a Special Flight Operations Certificate. We're almost through this. Right now the regulations come down to a lot of it has to do with weight. So your takeoff weight of the drone, how much it weighs when it's flying in the air with its battery in and all that kind of stuff, will determine pretty much what category you can fall into. And it can also affect on where you fly. And part of the reason is kinetic energy. So they've decided that 1 kilogram above or below is the deciding factor of how much damage a falling drone can do to either a person or an object, be it a vehicle or a house or something else. So they've determined that below 1 kilogram, the risk is less than, say, something that's above a kilogram. If you look at the drone on the right that's above 1 kilogram, that's a very popular drone model from DJI. It's called a Phantom 4. A lot of folks are using those. Shoots excellent video and photos. Below it is a DJI Mavic. It's just below a kilogram. I think it's around 800 grams. And again, as well, shoots great video, but it doesn't have the same options as the Phantom does. But it can fold right up and put in your backpack, and you can bring it out on the water or on the trail with you. All that information on how much it weighs for takeoff, and it should be consideration when you're buying a drone if that's what you intend to do, can be found in the product documentation before you buy it. Talk a little bit about airspace beforehand. I'm just going to give you an example of what a chart looks like around the St. John's area. This is what pilots will use when they're navigating for whatever purpose. And you can see around the Northeast Avalon, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 airports, plus that little blue dot there just below Kelly's Island, if you're familiar with Conception Bay, is also the heliport there for Cougar, their alternate in Long Pond. And of course, there's a heliport at the Health Science in St. John's. The rules state right now you have to stay 9 kilometers away from the center of each aerodrome. That's just a little graphic of what we pilots use to navigate in certain airports, and you can see that it can be quite complicated at times. This is a map of Newfoundland showing all the aerodromes or facilities where there could be potential traffic in and out with circles around them. So it's not a densely populated area like you would probably see in Ontario, British Columbia. But if we switch to the Northeast Avalon, you can see it pretty much eliminates all drone flying from right down to almost Holyrood, where all those red circles are, based on the current regulations as they are right now. So a lot of folks don't understand that or don't know that, and that's why we're seeing a lot of incidents occur. They've had 2 incidents at the St. John's International Airport, I think, a couple years ago with aircraft seeing drones on the approach path to the runway. So it certainly is a concern. Transport Canada's got a great website that's dedicated to UAV rules and knowledge. You just type in TC and then UAV, and you'll get all this information. These are some infographics that they've produced to kind of take the rules in that boring, lame format that they got right now in the lawyer speak, and they've turned it into something that's a little easier to follow. And with the one here on the right-hand side, basically it's a flow chart to help you determine whether or not you need certain certification, and if so, where you can operate and how to go about getting that certification. And it's something that is easily accessible on that website, and I encourage folks, if you're interested in doing this, even if you're looking at hiring a contractor, it's good to have it on hand to know that where they may or may not be able to operate based on what kind of certifications they have. So currently in Canada, there's 2 ways. If you want to, get some footage of a part of your operation, your tourism operation, there's 2 ways of going about it commercially. First is to apply for an exemption from, you want to be excused from the Canadian aviation regulations. There's a lot of requirements around that, but it was pretty much developed for rural areas that don't have a lot of air traffic, whether it be coastal Newfoundland or out in the prairie somewhere, where folks want to benefit from drone data, but we're being restricted by that based on the rules that were out at the time. So if you cannot meet any of the points in the exemption, you can't. You'll have to apply for a special flight operations certificate, which is a very lengthy process. And when you get your application in and they process it about a month later, you'll get a letter back saying you've been approved for 1 flight. Apply again when you want to do another one, and that'll take another 30 days. And eventually you work towards what's called a blanket SFOC, which is what we have at CloudBreaker, where we're allowed to operate anytime, anywhere in Atlantic Canada, as long as we follow the rules that are set out for us by Transport Canada. And this is just an example of a letter from Transport Canada on the side here that is giving us permission to operate under a special flight operations certificate. Again, it took me about a week to write my application. I have an aviation background. They want to know what type of UAV you're using, how you're going to operate in the normal sense, you know, your pre-takeoff, your flight, and your post-flight procedures, how you're going to handle an emergency, whether if the drone flies away on you or if it crashes and there's a fire, how you intend to maintain this drone, and your insurance requirements. There's a lot of online UAV SFOC consulting services out there. People are willing to take your money and do all this stuff for you. So buyer beware when you go in for that. The future regulations are going to be a lot less complicated, and hopefully will be allow folks who are in more rural parts of the provinces to be able to use the drones for what they're great at, and that's getting some great aerial footage. And the way they're going to go about it is they're going to base it on the weight of the drone, where you're going to fly it, and how much risk there's involved. So I got a couple examples coming up after these slides right here that are based in the province here to kind of shed some light on how this might work. Again, but I'll move this through quite quickly. If when the new regulations come out, if the drone weighs between 250 grams and a kilogram, you'll have to put your name on it. You have to pass a basic knowledge test, much like the pleasure boating certificate you have to get now if you want to operate a pleasure boat. You got to have liability insurance, and then of course below that are some of the requirements about staying away from airports. There's more rules around that, but that's just a little bit of the information, the core stuff right there. So you can see not around airports. You can be in a rural area. You can be over a built-up area because they considered those drones light enough that they won't really do much damage, but you can't be around an airport and people. The next section is drones from a kilogram to 25 kilograms, and you want to operate in a rural area. So say you're with a mining company and you want to survey your mine, or say you're a kayak company doing adventure tourism and you're out in a very remote part of the province and you want to get some aerial video of your kayaks and interacting with whales or icebergs or something. The risk to air traffic is fairly low, but the drone is heavier. So they have still the same requirements as the very small drones, but you're limited in where you can operate. And then finally, what most commercial operators are going to be using, like ourselves when we transfer over, is complex operations. So for the same weight of drones. So we want to be able to fly in the city. We want to be able to fly in controlled airspace, which is around an airport. We've done jobs at the airport. When they develop the new runways there, we film that stuff there. So there's a lot more requirements involved, and that's where you're going to need some folks with experience in aviation to help you to navigate there and make sure you can get certified to do this. The big thing here is that instead of just doing a knowledge test and getting a certificate, you actually got to get a pilot permit, which is a dumbed-down version of a pilot's license. And the drone has to be what's called meet a design standard, which means that they have to be able to withstand certain things. But you have the most options with that kind of certification. So for most folks in the tourism industry that may operate their own drones, especially I would assume in Newfoundland, they operate in fairly remote areas. They get spectacular scenery, and they want to be able to show that to their potential customers. So this example is a company out of Trinity, no one specific, but there's a kayaking company or venture travel company out of Trinity, and they're interested in using the drone they got for Christmas to get some aerial video of their kayakers interacting with whales or icebergs. So a good operator would do a site assessment. They would check out the area. Obviously, if there's any airports in the area, you can see really far to the west there's the Clarenville Airport. And the waterdrome at Thorburn Lake, but we're quite far from that. So on first look, it looks okay. And as a part of that exemption, currently under 1 kilogram, we just can't fly over a built-up area. So if we zoom in there, you can see that that filming that will happen out in that area is okay. As long as the people who are in the kayaks are aware of what's going on, are part of the filming and have been briefed and hopefully have signed a waiver, they can be a part of that filming, and you should be okay to fly. Another example is there's a organization up in Tullingate that wants to get some great scenics of the icebergs in and around the harbor in Tullingate, and they're using a Phantom. So Phantom 4 weighs more than a kilogram, so they would have to apply for the exemption for 1 kilogram to 25 kilograms. The problem there is that you can't fly within 5 nautical miles, about 9 kilometers of a built-up area. And you can see that the green arc around it there prevents that. The screenshots I got there is a website that you can get online. It's very easy to access. It's from the NRC, the National Research Council of Canada. You Google NRC and then UAV, and this interactive map will come up. And if you're not sure or if you're unaware, this is a good tool to use. Of course, the best way to go about finding out if you can fly a drone in this particular area or not is either to contact Transport Canada on their website, or to give us a call at CloudBreaker, and we'll be able to help you out. So all that is done. I'm sure there might be some questions on the rules later on, but we'll talk a little bit about operating your own drone. If there's some folks there that have their own drone or are interested in using them, like we did an example before, these are fairly complicated. They can be very complicated machines. They're fairly easy to operate, but there are a lot of options and a lot of idiosyncrasies with these things. So it's important to read the documentation. You have to be patient with this documentation. It's translated from, a lot of the companies are Chinese, and the rules or the instructions are translated from Chinese into English. So sometimes they don't make much sense. But that being said, the main components, of course, are the aircraft itself, the remote controller, what we call the ground control station. A lot of the new drones now require a tablet to go with it, whether it be an iPad or something else. And that acts as the interface, the interface between the controller and the drone, where you can change camera settings, things like that. If your tablet fails, the drone will still fly and still operate. So it's not completely necessary, but it's using the app on the tablet certainly is the main interface between you and the drone. Payload is 9 times out of 10 the camera that's installed on board. You have what we call mission support equipment, which is a fancy word. If you look at the picture on the lower right-hand side, there's things that we set up when we set up our operation at a location. So we put out safety cones to mark off our takeoff and landing area. We put a sign up telling folks that we're operating a drone in the area, and to stay clear at their own risk, or come close at their own risk. And they could be filmed depending on what we're doing. We have safety vests on, we wear safety glasses, so on and so forth. We also even have a fire extinguisher that we bring with us, and that's a part of our certification. We, just like the pilots use in the aircraft before and during and after a flight, we use checklists and to make sure that we're checking over things correctly beforehand, and that's based on experience. Those checklists are developed based on experience, and also the requirements of the drone operator. They don't normally issue their instructions in a checklist-like manner, so we had to kind of dig through all the instructions and come up with a simple checklist to make sure we check certain things before we take off and during our flight and after our flight, especially making sure the SD card is in the camera, because you can go up and get some amazing shots and come down and realize, oh wait, no, that was recorded. Of course, your flight crew and documentation. You should always carry your insurance with you, and if you have an SFOC, you have to carry that with you as well. The number one call I get, besides can you see a moose with that, is my drone flew away and I don't know why. And 9 times out of 10 it's folks just not reading the instructions and understanding the basics of how these things work. You go online, you go on YouTube, there's lots of places to kind of get a crash course, excuse the pun, in how this stuff works. But checking your hardware out, just like if you're taking your boat out on the water, you're taking your boat out, your bike out on the road. You want to always check your hardware before you go, especially the props and that they're not cracked and they spin freely. Cracked props can vibrate and not only ruin your picture, create a vibration in your picture, but could also crack and cause your drone to crash. Software is a huge thing with these things, much like your computer or your phone or your smartphone. There's constant software updates to improve how the drone flies and some of the security features and getting rid of some of the bugs. So most drones these days upgrade themselves, their software on board through the app. And it can be a bit of a complicated process, but they're improving on that. If you're ever going to work on your drone inside your house, don't leave the props on. Sometimes these things can start up, especially when the software updates. And there's been many a story. I think a couple of years ago during the World Series, one of the pitchers was doing a modification on his drone in his house, and the engine started up, and he cut his finger, and he couldn't play for the rest of the World Series because of that. So no props on in the house. The engine can turn just fine. Just leave the props off. Batteries on drones are dangerous. They're called LiPo, lithium polymer batteries, and they had to be treated with care. You never leave them unattended when you're charging them. You ideally want to charge them on a concrete floor if possible, and in what's called a LiPo bag, so a bag that's fire retardant or fire resistant. So they have a tendency. They're a great technology because for the weight that for their weight they produce a lot of energy. But if they're punctured or mishandled in any kind of way, they have a tendency to catch on fire and they burn very rapidly. So battery care and maintenance is very important. Checking your payload, and that's usually your camera, to make sure it's working properly, keeping that lens clean, especially if you're operating in a salty environment like we are here in Newfoundland. Sea salt not only adheres to the lens, but also to your airframe. So I spend a lot of time using compressed air to blow some of that accumulation off the engines and parts of the airframe. Know how your emergency return safety feature works on your drone. If a couple of scenarios, if the drone loses its signal with the controller in your hand, it will initiate a recovery procedure. It'll do one of two things based on its battery. It will climb to a predetermined altitude, which you will set prior to your flight based on an assessment you've done of the area. It will climb to that altitude. It will fly back to where it started and land. It can't see, most of these things cannot see trees. It cannot see objects in the air. And so if you didn't put that altitude high enough, it might fly into the side of that tree. If it doesn't have enough battery power, it will just ascend and land. And of course, if you're over the water, it becomes a weight at that point. Frequency interference is a huge thing with drones. They operate off of a 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz normally. They operate on other frequencies as well, but it's the same as your home Wi-Fi. And when we're operating in a urban area, we've noticed interference from home Wi-Fi with our drone. And we do a frequency spectrum analysis, which is a fancy word. We look at the strengths of the signals around us to see if there's going to be a major source of interference. We operate down the regatta every summer, and one of the problems we have down there is that Alliant puts in a cell phone tower booster down there to handle all the cell phone traffic that's down there on that day. And we have to set up our operation away from that because those signals can interfere with our drone control. So if you're operating near a cell phone tower or something like that, be aware that that can cause an issue. Even there's been reports of cell phones causing problems. So our rule of thumb is to turn off every cell phone that we can in airplane mode, except for one if we require for our operation. Certainly weather limitations. Most drones do not like to fly in water or rain or snow. They pick up ice on their blades, so you want to know what those limitations are, and the manufacturer will have those there as well. And I wrote prop safety in there again. You cannot be safe enough with those props. They will cut flesh and bone, depending on the model, and do some damage. So these things are basically developed to operate right out of the box. You can charge up the battery, start up the controller, start up the drone, flick the switches, off you go. If you want to operate your drone safely and you want to be able to ensure that you get good footage every single time, you want to develop a list of things like a checklist to do before flying. One thing that we do every single time as a part of our procedure is that we do a site assessment and survey. So even before showing up to the location, I check to see where our client wants us to fly. Is there around any aerodromes? Is there any other obstacles in that area that I can see from Google Maps or the aeronautical charts that I referenced, and also in discussion with the client. And then when we get on site, if we're close by, we'll do a survey. What are the obstacles? Are there other areas to land if I have to land at? Am I going to be trespassing on private property? A whole bunch of things that you want to take into account. And what's the weather going to be like in the area? And there's different methods of going about and getting that information, whether it be aeronautical meteorology information or just your public forecast. One thing that we do every single time is a pre-flight briefing, safety briefing, and then the flight briefing itself. So we just review some of the emergency procedures on the drone, ensuring we have our return to home altitude set properly. If there's more than one person operating, we usually operate with 2 or 3 people. We go over what we do in the event there is an emergency or the drone has some sort of accident. And we also brief what we're going to do during that flight. And we have limited time in the air. Your battery only lasts so long. You only have a certain number of batteries. You want to make sure that you don't have your signals crossed and you're going up and capturing what you want as efficiently as possible. We then follow our normal procedures. One thing we do after takeoff is we make sure the drone is flying correctly. We do what's called a flight control check. And we turn the camera on to make sure that it's recording properly, so that instead of it being 300 meters away and the subject that you're following has already started and you have an issue, you get that stuff sorted out beforehand and before you go. It also gives the time for the battery to warm up, especially in these cold conditions, which is one thing you want to be aware of. We designate a safety area with those pylon cones you see on there, depending on the location that we're operating in, especially in more urban or where there's more of the public around. And we have someone that enforces that at all times. You have a lot of gawkers when you fly drones for this kind of work. Like I said, the number one question is, can you see a moose? And that seems to be the driving interest in a lot of this stuff. But you don't want members of the public or people unintentionally disturbing the pilot, because they've got to keep a focus on what they're doing. And if you're operating with 2 people, the payload operator. Of course, can't reiterate enough, like the props: battery safety, battery safety, battery safety. Never leave them charging by themselves. Be aware of the temperature in which you're flying at. Cold batteries tend to fail. And the windier it is, the quicker your batteries will come down. So always have what we call in aviation bingo fuel. It's fuel that the minimum amount of voltage left in your battery you're going to come home with. If you're flying on a really windy day and you fly downwind and you spend a whole bunch of time filming something, and then you wait till your battery is almost at a critical level to fly back into that wind, your drone's not going to come home. So you want to take all that kind of stuff into consideration when you're before you go flying and during your flight. So it would be amiss if I didn't actually talk about, it's hard to, on a webinar, to talk about how to fly a drone, but it's really, the goal is, in any drone flying, in my opinion, is not to make it look like a drone shot. You want to make it look like it was taken from a helicopter or something like that. And that takes practice, practice. Going out and working on the particular moves that are make drone imagery look like it was taken from a helicopter. And you can see examples of that online, some of the better stuff, and then try and replicate it yourself. Usually it requires a complex sequence of moves with your fingers and your thumbs to make that happen, but it does come along. Make sure your camera is set up for the conditions that you're about to fly in. Some folks add polarizers to their camera to help reduce the glare on the water if you're operating in and around water. A lot of drones have the ability, or you have the ability, to adjust the control sensitivity of the drone. So on a really windy day, you might want your drone to react a little more quickly to prevent that being pushed around in the wind. But on a nice calm day, you might want it to be a little bit more mushy, so that when you're making turns, it's nice and smooth and it's not jerky and ruining the shot. And that comes with experience. I've of course talked about trying to make it not look like a drone shot there. John Sturge, our creative director and our main the main guy on the controls for the camera, because we have an ability to operate the camera independent of the drone. He's always saying, go closer, closer. He wants close to the objects, flying close to the particular objects, obviously if we're doing it safely and within the regulations, but he wants closer all the time to get that imagery that we're skimming over something or flying over something, especially trees. It requires, it produced a lot of sweat in me because it's an expensive piece of equipment to have up there, but he wants closer, and of course it leads to great shots later on. So as you get better at flying the drone, try and use objects in the air to get that close shot. And of course the other big thing is a reveal. One great shot is backing up and just seeing blue sky and water, and then all of a sudden you reveal a big church or an object on the ground or some whales and the kayakers around it. Keep the audience guessing. So little tricks like that can help you make your drone shots look a lot better. I can't emphasize this enough. Time of day and sun angle are extremely important when flying a drone. Like any photography, they got the golden hours in the morning and evening time, but with that becomes the potential of a drone shadow, and you can see the shadow of your drone as you're filming something, and that's a big, I guess, creative faux pas. You don't want to be doing that. So you always want to take the sun angle into account and the time of day and the effect it's going to have not only on your shot, but also where the drone is going to be in relation to that. And it's really hard sometimes on your screen to see that shadow on the ground or on the water. So it looks like a great shot. You come back to base, you land the drone, you look at the footage. Oh man, there's a drone shadow, and it's basically useless. Again, depending on what your standards are. I always like to use the wind to my advantage. The wind allowing the drone to float, almost like float down the river with the stream. If it's a half windy day or if it's a nice breeze blowing and I'm looking for a particular nice smooth rotation of what we call yawing the drone or moving the nose of the drone around to pan around, I like the wind to push me while I do that because it's a bit steadier than having the drone do it itself. If you're flying on a windy day, you want to start upwind and work your way back so you don't have to fight through the wind to get back to you as your battery is getting lower. So always part of your site assessment, find out where the wind is coming from. When you get up higher, around 300 feet, the wind's usually blowing stronger than it is on the ground. So take that into account as well. And finally, the thing with drones is that most cameras that are on drones today at a reasonable price come with a fairly wide field of view on your camera. So you see a lot of stuff. So if you want close-up of something, you usually got to fly really close to get it. And that can be either dangerous or not ideal. So as you get more expensive drones, you have the ability to change out your lenses, and then you can change your field of view for that. And of course, some drones have the ability to zoom in. So just keep that in mind. You might have in your mind a particular shot that may not be possible based on how wide the camera is. So that just it comes from experience flying your drone, knowing what it can do and what it can't do, and what it's really good at, and then designing your shot list from there. And that's where I move in to a particular video I got here. Again, I apologize for the choppiness, but I just want to demonstrate on here a few of the drone moves that we've used in one of our recent productions about the Trinity Bight area. This is English Harbor you're looking at right now. And for this piece, there was really slow music that we decided to use, so we wanted all of our shots to be epic and slow. So you're deliberate, and that was a part of our shot list. So we can just see us backing up and doing a bit of a reveal here, slowly showing the town, using this little barn here as a reveal to show the English Harbor Arts Center, nice and slow. We tie it in with ground shots, which breaks up the aerial stuff a little bit. Again, another reveal showing the rock wall, showing the church, and focusing on the bay there on the Bight. Again, ground shots to kind of break your shots up a little bit, which are really important. You can see us punching in on this one instead of backing up, and we use that ground shot to break that. And then this lady here, Kim, she's discussing about just the freedom of being in that area, and then we show the beautiful and stunning geography that's out on the Port Rexton area. This particular shot right here, if you saw it there, I'm just going to go back a little bit. You can see a little bit of mist passing. That was intentional. Again, it's using something close to provide that dynamic and speed. It looks like we're on top of these people right here, but we had a different lens on. We're actually quite far away, but we were able to get that shot. And it was a shot where the camera was panning to the right, but the drone was still going forward. And a lot of good drone shots come from that particular maneuver right there, where you pass the object but pan back towards it. And as you can see, we're doing right there, and adds to a nice dramatic shot. Now, those sequences of shots came from about 6 hours of filming. So we had about 5 minutes of usable footage from 6 hours of filming. So you're not going to get the shot every time. Again, a lot of it's practice, but I'll move on to the next slide there now. My apologies. So to help concentrate yourself, you want a shot list. Know your site. You got limited time. Make it count with that battery. If you have a subject, like a person that's in a kayak, make sure they're briefed on what you want to do. We usually have someone with a remote control or with a radio control to ask them to come back or start again. Make use of all your flying time. So if you're going out a certain distance and you're coming back, make that a shot as well. You never know what you're going to capture. We run the camera all the time on our machine, and sometimes we've gotten shots that we didn't expect. Battery management, like I said before, start high. If you're going to be doing work at higher altitudes, like 200-300 feet, do your work up there first and then make your way down instead of expending all your battery to get back up there again when you only have 20 or 30% left. Know your limits. Know what you can and cannot do. And remember, keep safety first. And tell your subjects, don't look at the camera. It ruins a drone shot. There's nothing worse than people looking at the camera. It ruins it all. So that's the #1 rule right there. And we're quickly running out of time here, but I just wanted to show the shots from here as well. Again, using the folks in the foreground there as a reference to the size of everything, and really filling that screen with the iceberg, using that reveal shot right there, backing up, moving forward, and doing a little bit of a pan. So if you can get those basic maneuvers down, it'll really improve the quality of your drone shots that you get. This is fairly quick, folks, so I'll move this through this pretty quickly here. If you don't own your own drone, you're interested in getting some aerial footage, and you're interested in contracting an operator to do that, we're kind of in the wild west of all that, this stuff right now. There isn't a list of certified operators out there you can go reference, like a Better Business Bureau, or they're a part of an association, like there are for other trades. So that will come. But in the meantime, you've got to do your homework. Every drone company or UAV company that you hire should have a code of ethics or a safety code that they're going to live up to. I mean, it's one thing to do it, to put it down on paper, but it's another thing to see them operate and see how they follow through with their pledge. This is just an example of a company that put out a set of rules and how they operate, so people know what the ground rules are before they're hired. Like I said, do your research. Make sure that the company that you're hiring has the appropriate drone for the mission of what you plan on doing, and getting the imagery that you want to get. You want to do your best to have a little bit of knowledge about the rules, and to make sure that when you're speaking with a potential service provider, that they're able to talk the talk and answer some of the questions that you might have. Every potential drone service provider should be able to provide you with 2 things at the drop of a hat: a copy of their Special Flight Operations Certificate with the date and all the qualifications behind it. It is not a secret document. They should be able to provide you a copy of that over via file and email, and a copy of their public liability insurance. And you want to see at least $1 million. The minimum is $100,000. I wouldn't be involved with anyone that's got less than $1 million public liability insurance. That is UAV specific. So be very clear on that. You want to obviously use someone that seems professional and experienced. You might get a glimpse of that through their website, but also talking to them on the phone and asking them jobs that they've done before. See their portfolio, ask for references and clients they've worked with before, and see what kind of product they can deliver, just like any other business. And find out what their expectations are as your client, or you as a client, what your expectations are, so there's no misunderstandings. We develop a process at CloudBreaker where we have a very thorough estimate sheet where we list the things that we've agreed upon in terms of deliverables and some of the things that we can and cannot do. We don't fly in rain. We don't fly over 30 kilometers an hour, things like that. So we know what the ground rules are before we start off and don't show up on the day that we were intending to based on the weather. It's also really important to know what they're going to deliver to you, what file format. It could be even something as if it's going to be an MOV file, it's going to be an MP4 file. We've run into issues in that in the past when we first started out. I like having my clients on site and briefed. Obviously, they're not standing over my shoulder while we're shooting, but we have the ability to review some of the footage later on, and they are able to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down on what they saw. And we also give them an idea of what to expect and what kind of imagery they can expect, and to kind of curb any expectations that they want a drone buzzing off someone's head as the whale is breaching at the same time. I mean, sometimes you get great shots and sometimes you don't. You want to be, and you want to find out as well if this company can provide any post-production work. So if you don't have the ability to turn that into a promotional video, are they able to do it? And again, what do they charge for that? And when would they be able to produce that stuff? In terms of pricing, I'll just give you ours. We're not shy about what our pricing is. I think we're a little bit more expensive than most operators in the province. We charge $2,200 a day as a flat rate, and that's 8 hours of flying. We have a lot of batteries, but we charge them as quickly as we can. But there's times if we're filming a lot, we might have to take a break while the batteries recharge, and we put that all out there before we go flying. So we offer a half day and a day rate, and there's a mileage issue or a mileage charge as well and things like that. But for that $2,200, you get full certification and transparency. You might find people that have other rates around that or different ways of charging. So be sure to ask them for the rate sheet and make sure that you're clear on what the charges are going to be before signing that contract to do the work. So new regulations are coming. If you're looking at getting any kind of certification, I would actually wait until the new rules come out and then go from there. It's a bit of a gray time right now. So if you're looking at doing your own thing, wait for the new regulations to come out. Study up on them. They might be tweaked a little bit, but they will offer more clarity. If you're going to use your drone to complement your social media or your online content, be as safe as you operate your business. And a lot of the folks around this province and New Brunswick, they have an excellent reputation, especially in the environment that we operate in or we do business in. It's very wild. The weather changes very quickly, as you can tell today. So use that same discretion if you're going to be operating a drone to capture that. And if you're contracting, do your homework. There's lots of references online. I recommend a guy online in Nova Scotia called Flight Lab. He writes a blog, very informative, plain language, and he's a great resource. A lot of folks in Canada use his knowledge as a foundation for moving forward in either hiring someone or doing their own thing with a drone. Thanks very much for having me. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much. And if you have any questions, feel free to fire my way.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat window, and we will address them now.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for the question. We're having a little bit of feedback here with the thing. We haven't done work in Labrador. There is a gentleman, and his name escapes me right now. There's somebody up in Hopedale, I think, that's doing some drone work. I'm not sure if he's doing media type work. I know he's doing some survey stuff. His name will come to me eventually, but we haven't, mostly because most of our work's been in the northeast Avalon or on the east coast of, or west coast of Newfoundland, a great shootout in Stephenville last year. So unfortunately not. I have flown up in Labrador when I used to work for PAL. It's a great place to go shoot, and in terms of remoteness, it'd be a lot easier to fly up there in terms of staying out of the way of any air traffic or people on the ground, of course, due to its density of population.
We have a lot of questions okay. From Amy from NL Tourism. What are the penalties for tourism businesses using drones for their marketing and not following these regulations?
That's from Amy at Newfoundland Tourism. Thanks for the question there, Amy. I don't think there's, unless there's an accident or an incident, I don't think there's any kind of penalties. If the drone operator is operating outside of the rules, and this has happened in the past, they'll post their stuff online, so a concerned citizen emails Transport Canada Enforcement gets involved to gather the information. That person that operating the drone can be fined. Whether the third party or the client gets charged with something, probably not. We find in the province that there are some rogue operators out there, or operators that are great photographers that just don't know what the rules are and are producing great content and are getting paid for it, but they're not going through the process of being certified. And what we find now is a lot of associations. I've talked to the Search and Rescue Association of Canada. They're setting up guidelines for all their search and rescue associations across the country as to follow in terms of hiring providers for drone work. The Newfoundland Labrador Surveyors Association, realtors, all these types of associations, they can kind of control that by ensuring that their members are following a set of guidelines. And that's what we want. We're ready to put our work up against anybody else. But we went through the expense and the effort to get certified and operate safely, and unfortunately sometimes we lose jobs to folks that although they do great work, they don't have the same qualifications and certification. Yeah, that's a good question. Travelers, depending on what part of the world they're from, right now, if they're from outside of Canada, they can't even, if they're flying recreationally, there's a limited number of places they can fly here. One thing that we've had a challenge with in the media is media companies are really eager to show drone videos, and gets my dander up every time I see a video of Bannerman Park and people skating around the park, and of course you know the person who shot it and they didn't shoot it illegally. So the media companies have gotten better at kind of sussing that stuff out. We don't want people to be encouraged to do that, and hopefully someday there's some sort of I don't want to say certification, but some sort of recognition or sticker you can get to say that, listen, we're certified, and this comes from a healthy place. This comes from an operator that's following the rules. Until that time, I guess not to encourage. The best way not to encourage folks who are doing that outside the rules is to do your homework and make sure that what you're about to promote or tweet or whatever on your social media networks was captured in a responsible manner.
What questions should we ask tourism operators before sharing your drone photography, videography to ensure we are sharing content that
That's a discussion, I guess, for Hospitality Newfoundland and Labrador as well. But one question is that how did you get it? Did you guys get it from a certified drone operator? And if you didn't, did you capture it yourselves? And what was the method? Did you follow the rules? I guess you got to take people's word sometimes as well. But it's certainly something that the industry is going to have to figure out. Like I said before, there isn't a website, on Transport Canada you can go to and say such and such an operator is certified. For some weird reason, Transport Canada doesn't make that information public. So as Tourism Newfoundland and Labrador, I see the challenge there that you've got all this great content, and you want to make sure it's coming in an ethical way, but how do you guarantee that? That's a tough question to answer. It's a great question. It's a tough question to answer. I guess you just have to work with your partners and educate them on what's acceptable and what's not. And if you want to get proper footage out there, these are the rules that you're going to have to follow.
Is your footage from the Bonavista Peninsula available for sharing?
Okay, so the documentary, so the iceberg footage we sold actually to Tourism Newfoundland and Labrador through Target Marketing. So as soon as we released that documentary in November last year, we got a phone call. We shot all that in 4K. It's great footage. They bought it off us. So that was a self-produced documentary that we did. We had a great time in the Trinity Bight shooting it. And when we sold that footage, it paid for that trip, I guess, in a weird sense. But there's a documentary we have on our Vimeo page. It's online. It has all that footage in it. It's called Keep the Lights On. And it's a self-produced documentary we did last year on the Trinity Bight about the resurgence and interest in that area and some of the unique players that are operating up there, be it John Fisher at Fisher's Loft and the incredible facility he's created up there and built to the girls at the brewery in Port Rexton and the English Harbor Arts Center and the amazing place that is. So I encourage you to check that out.
And Charlotte, I finished my ground
Pilot's license.
We would like to start offering filming services to our partners this summer. Will it be worth it to wait for the new regulations instead of trying to apply for SFOC this summer?
Hi, Charlotte. Great question. Thank you. Okay, this is the flight instructor in me talking now. I think it'd be good for you to apply for an SFOC, partly because it's a good exercise. It really helps you sort through your, and when you say your ground school, I'm assuming a UAV ground school. Not a particular pilot's license or anything. There will be a requirement. I don't know if that ground school will be grandfathered in to the new regulations. You'll have to check with the person or a group that provided that. But the process of applying for an SFOC is a great exercise. It helps you know your machine. It helps you know your procedures, develop your procedures, and really think about what you would do in an emergency situation. So I would encourage you, even just to go through the process of applying for an SFOC. There's templates out there. You can go online. There's particular NAV Canada regions. That's a fancy word for areas of the country that NAV Canada is responsible for. They're the national airspace provider. They have basically a cheat sheet of what they want to see, and Transport Canada has that as well. So you can Google that and work through that. But it gets you in the books and gets you in the rules, and you'll be a lot better for it later on. Thanks, Amy. They're the nice things there. Yeah, the Target has the footage. I think they're working on something. So they have the iceberg footage anyways, the rest of the Skirring Trail and everything else. We just sold them the iceberg stuff. So, but a lot of that other footage is on there. And, of course, we had a bumper year for icebergs last year, so it was really exciting shooting up in that area. Oh, okay, UAV Ground School through pilottraining.ca. Okay, Charlotte, yeah, I would definitely contact them and find out. Again, the issue with UAV pilot training right now is there's no such thing as certification as of right now. These groups are providing this service, but you don't really get anything. It helps with your insurance down the road if you tell your insurance company that you did go through training, and I encourage any kind of training is good, but you don't have anything from Transport Canada in your hand at the end. That will change in the future. So when those new regulations come out, you'll have to do a knowledge test. And if you want to operate in a complex urban environment, you're going to have to get a pilot permit. And I don't know if the training you got will grandfather you in. You might have to write an online exam, much like I had to do when I got my pilot's license. You might have to write an exam to meet that standard from Transport Canada. So good luck to you. It's hard, but it's fun. Nothing better than on a sunny day in Newfoundland, flying a drone around, getting some great footage. So I wish you best of luck in it.
Did anybody have any other questions? This is a really great discussion.
Yeah, search the web for UAV operators in Atlantic Canada. You know, there's some of us out there. and people offer services at varying degrees. Just do your homework and ensure that, those folks are going to do it safely for you. And you know what? Sometimes I've turned down jobs just because it's not worth the risk. And that might be a possibility sometimes too. Drones can't solve all the, can't do everything, and sometimes it's not the drone, it's the risk that's involved. So we do that sometimes, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you guys for your questions. That was really great.